this is probably the most concentrated educational opportunity in our industry for anybody.
The value of attending IBEX is incalculable because there probably is no other place that you can be among so many knowledgeable people and have an opportunity to not only take formal classes from them, but chat with people on the show floor.
You're going to learn a lot today, and I think that's what people left that room saying, wow, we learned some stuff today that we didn't know before we went in, and that is always our goal here at IBEX.
The primary reason I come to IBEX is because all the movers and shakers in the industry are here. And whereas most boat shows, they're just interested in selling product, and they want to do that here as well, but all the technicians are here.
The folks that are in the booths, while there are salespeople there are also engineers and technical people, and that's something that you don't usually get at a typical boat show.
And it's just a fabulous collection of the most intelligent and smartest and best educated technical people in the whole industry right here at IBEX.
People that are in the trade would be foolish not to attend an event like this. I think the value is extremely high for those reasons, the educational aspect of it and sort of the informal ability to speak with people who are representing products and can answer technical questions.
It's not only the education that they get in the IBEX sessions, it's also the relationships they can have. I mean, you got the boat builders sitting in a room, like today we have 50 boat builders all together, all with the same issues, sitting in the room and networking.
Hello and welcome to all of you tuning in to join us today from nearby in North America or far elsewhere in the world. On behalf of IBEX 365 and the Rhode Island Marine Trades Association, my name is Evan Ridley, your host for this event about recreational boats and building the composites recycling supply chain. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here to take part in what promises to be both a really informative and engaging outlook on the future of sustainable life cycle management for composites such as fiberglass. We also hope to touch on some opportunities for the marine industry and how they can contribute to innovative and ever-evolving supply chain solutions that will capitalize on the values of end-of-life composite material. This is a topic that has historically been rooted in many sessions over the years at IBEX, and we believe now more than ever it is important to work and collaborate together in addressing industry-wide solutions that will tackle challenges like this. Before we begin, we'll remind you that you can submit questions and comments directly to me and our speakers through the Q&A function on the toolbar in your Zoom webinar window. Please feel free to engage with us throughout our time together this afternoon, and we'll be happy to address any additional questions as follow-up as well moving forward. We're thrilled to have our speakers here with us today, and we'll get together and get started right now with a few slides just to introduce what we're going to be talking about today. So I think that an image like this is a universal reality for boaters and folks in the marine industry alike. I think it's fair to say that as boaters, we are really attuned to the environment around us. It was just this morning that the National Marine Manufacturers Association put out a report that backed up some long-standing statistics that indicate that, in fact, recreational boating is really the number one way for Americans to engage with the natural environment. And I think that as folks in this industry, manufacturing boats and marine products, we are especially aware of the impacts that these boats can have, not only during their time on the water, but throughout their life cycle. Historically, environmental stewardship has been something that is always at the forefront of environmental industry proactivity and is always at the forefront of our thoughts in building boats. However, at this time, we realize that more than ever, we are becoming focused on the material bank that exists in boats throughout their life cycle, the resources that are in that bank, the roles that they play and the values that they hold, both as constructive materials, ancillary products and components in their time of usage, but also beyond that time of usage. And so we've been very fortunate to take this approach that really centers on reducing damages, reducing contributions to hard to manage waste streams. This is an image that's common to many of us thinking about waste in many different ways these days, trying to move up the pyramid towards a future that embraces circularity and emphasizes the reuse of materials and the minimization of waste in innovative ways. And often that requires collaboration and research and intercommunication between discourses and fields that historically may not be used to working with one another. Reflecting the reality of this situation is the numbers that we're seeing, particularly in the United States, where we know that 2% of the national recreational fleet every year is reaching this retirement status, whether they are in backyards or driveways or taking up precious space in a marina or a boatyard. These boats do pose significant environmental risks, both as they are weight long-term solutions and as they are being managed through those traditional outlets today, things like landfilling. And those of us that are aware of the manufacturing increases and the boom in boating that has occurred in recent years, we have to ask ourselves, what does that boon come with on the other side? Is there a legacy fleet that is going to be beyond the capacity and capabilities of our infrastructure to manage? Is it going to have an impact on access and efficiency in recreational boating? Beyond that, we know that there's more priority on the waterfront and reducing things like marine debris. And because abandoned and derelict vessels are such a prominent feature in the marine debris landscape, we're seeing more and more prioritization of these items in federal and regional legislation, looking for not only capacity to take these materials and bring them somewhere, but actually do something meaningful with them through recycling or beneficial reuse. In Rhode Island, we've been really fortunate to be placed in a position where, as a hub of boating industry and as a small state with limited waste management infrastructure, extra ambition to really sink our teeth into what potential solutions could lie beyond the landfill. With some support from grants over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been able to work really successfully alongside Lafarge Wholesome Cement and their subsidiary Geocycle to verify the values of end-of-life hull materials, including fiberglass, as an additive and raw material replacement for cement manufacturing. This evolved over a couple of years of analytical work, analysis, trials, and really what RIMTA centered on a logistic supply chain for collecting boats, managing those materials, processing them to the specifications of an end user, and getting them toward a destination beyond indefinite burial. Through these efforts over the last couple of years, we've been able to garner some federal support, and we've begun to see this model that started in Rhode Island take root in other states and regions around the country, which is really encouraging. Because within all of these opportunities, I think there's clear questions and challenges that remain, and it's important to look both within the marine industry and outside the marine industry for insight into those kinds of questions and challenges. And that's a really big part of why we're here today with our speakers, John Bayless of Brunswick, Dan Coughlin of the American Composites Manufacturers Association, and Christopher Howell of Veolia North America. We'll start with you, Dan. Can you introduce yourself and give a little insight into what the American Composites Manufacturers Association does and how they've really approached this topic and worked to engage different material users on defining solutions?
Thank you, Evan. Thank you to IBEX and NMMA for inviting me to speak here, and Evan for your pioneering work in recycling. My name is Dan Coughlin. I'm the Vice President of Market Development for the American Composites Manufacturers Association. So composites, obviously a big part of boating, lasts a long time, very durable, corrosion resistant, can shape it into a number of different shapes. A little difficult to recycle, so we're working on that, and that's the subject of this presentation, which is to talk about a project which has been proposed to the Department of Energy to repurpose boat hulls and other FRP composites using the next generation of technology. ACMA, we are, an association of over 400 members, made up of manufacturers, suppliers, distributors, and affiliates. And basically, we are the voice of the composites industry in the United States and North America. I'm happy to work with other organizations like MMA to to solve issues that are more difficult and too difficult to solve by one company. Just a little bit of what composites are by the numbers, as you see here. Of course, marine expected to reach 5 billion next year, growing very rapidly. We're in wind energy, we're in aerospace, automotive, infrastructure, construction, trucks, sporting goods. But of course, we're talking about boating today, but these are the allied sectors of the economy that also share this same opportunity, which is to increase the circularity of fiberglass and other composite materials. Just to talk a little bit about, hey, what is sustainable? Here's a definition that seems to resonate for a lot of folks. But sustainable development is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So we kind of keep that front and center. Here is from a website, Simplicable. I was able to bring, these are all the check boxes related to characteristics of sustainable materials, and I've organized them for FRP composites that were very advantaged in a number of areas related to health, durability, responsible sourcing, environmental impact. They're economical, efficient, resilient. They last a long time, but that does create a challenge. And the challenge is, how do you reuse the material at the end of life? How do we reduce waste? Are two key areas we're working on related to sustainability of composites. So the current state of composites recycling. First of all, for ACMA, we want to create market pull for recycling of composite products, meaning if there's a market for it, if there's economic benefit to it, it will happen. And that is the most sustainable situation you can have related to recycling. And we also want to facilitate composites recycling through establishing an efficient composite recycling supply chain, meaning we aren't necessarily going to do it, but we want to promote the development of a really effective and economically viable recycling supply chain. So you saw a pyramid, the upside down pyramid a few slides ago that Evan showed. Here's another way to look at that same pyramid. How do we prevent the end of life of materials, keep them in service? Is kind of the best thing we can do. But if we can't do that, can we reuse or repurpose them or recycle them, recover materials, and obviously avoid, if at all possible, solid waste disposal? So this gets to the project that was proposed to the Rebate Institute, has been accepted by the Department of Energy. We're currently in the review phase of developing a contract for this project. So there's still opportunity for folks to get involved if you're interested. But essentially, this project is broken up into two pieces. The first piece is that we want to commercialize a high-value composites remanufacturing process that retains as much of the intrinsic value of the material as possible. And I'll talk about that in a second. And then part two is, as I talked about before, if we have an efficient supply chain to feed that process and to feed other recycling processes, that's really essential for the economical recycling and reuse of materials. So if you look at this project and what it would do, if successful, is reduce the embodied energy of the materials used in CO2 emissions by 90+%. In terms of the materials which would be impacted in the US, it would be 860,000 metric tons per year. Worldwide, over 2.9 million metric tons per year. So you see here some scrap composite materials. You see some wind turbines in the background. A lot of repowering of wind turbines occurring today. We see that the yachting industry, the boating industry, and the wind industry as kind of lead users creating market pull for recycling and circularity of composites. So just a quick overview of the remanufacturing technology that has been developed at West Virginia University. They start with a piece of material that might be a wind blade, it might be a boat hull. And you see on the bottom the actual picture in the lab of this occurring, but a light solvolysis process where you lightly remove some of the material so that you can reform it and make it pliable, and then reinfuse that same material with enough resin to reharden it into a new composite product. So think about taking a wind blade or a boat, turning it into a cargo container, other dimensional product, with another life. As Evan talked about, if I remember, 2% per year over 100 years. So your boats are lasting 50 years. So maybe you get another 50 years out of the product that you make from that same boat. So you have a 100-year product rather than 50 years. So if you look at the recycling supply chain, why is that so important? Is we really want to promote the development of all manner of circularity, recycling related to composites. The best thing you can do is kind of keep that composite in use, reuse, repair. There is some technology out there for grinding, pyrolysis, and cement kiln reprocessing to avoid solid waste disposal. But there's a missing piece, which is this high value remanufacturing process, as I just showed. That would be one example, would be the light solvolysis process. And essentially what we want to do is get 5 lives out of each composite part before it gets fully recycled. These are some of our partners in this project: Strongwell, Ineos, Applied Bioplastics, Rhode Island Marine Trade Association, AOC Resins, Paulent, as well as Remade and the Department of Energy. And our vision here is that they would be recycling centers around the country. You see in green the proposed test bed in West Virginia, where you would bring in truck beds, bicycles, wind blades, boats, other materials, sort them, and then figure out which process is best suited to recycling that material. And then once you demonstrate that test bed, replicate it all over the country and have those sorts of centers available at sites all around the country, available to recycle the old boats. If you want to become involved in the project, again, we're still in that contracting phase. If you want to provide raw materials, characterize the materials, identify applications for the remanufactured composites, test the properties of the remanufactured composites, provide feedback and guidance. So simply feedback and guidance to the team from West Virginia University and ACMA, identify sources and types of scrap material, identify the key stakeholders in the development of the recycling supply chain, assist with stakeholder analysis, and assist with the development of the prototype test bed. I just showed the test bed in the last slide. Provide industry guidance. So there's the government industry advisory board you can become involved in, participate in monthly and quarterly project reviews, assist in the development of a marketing plan to educate the industry and customers regarding the composite reuse and recycling options, and then participate in the outreach to educate industry and customers regarding the developments that we're making in this project. So I went through that fairly quickly, but just in conclusion, there are several options now that are available to avoid solid waste disposal, but 2 more elements are needed to create a complete circular economy ecosystem for fiber reinforced polymer composites. So the ones we're proposing here are the remanufacturing process created at West Virginia University, which, as I said, reduces embodied energy, materials, and CO2 by up to 90%. Develop an efficient supply chain that is needed to turn end-of-life composites into an economical raw material resource. So our project addresses those 2 items. Thank you for your attention today, and I welcome questions during the panel discussion.
Thanks, Dan. What an ambitious and insightful project that the Remade effort has turned out to be. Really encouraging to see all of the initiative included in that. Before we talk more about that project and its impact, I want to turn to John Bayless here. John, you're flying a familiar flag with Brunswick, and I want to ask you to just provide a little background about yourself and how this topic has played into your work in the strategic development area.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Evan, and thanks, Dan, for a great way to kick off the panel. By way of introduction, I work for Brunswick Corporation, A little bit about Brunswick. This is a company that's really focused now for the last 2 years exclusively on recreational marine industry. We're operating out of 140 facilities in 27 countries, serving 170 markets with about 14,000, 15,000 employees around the world. Really focused on innovation, not only in the product design, but also in business model value delivery for our boaters and for our boat builder and dealer customers. You can see that's reflected in being awarded over 300 patents in the last few years. The company's headquartered in Mattawa, Illinois, and that's where I'm working. That's where I'm from, in the headquarters organization. I'd like to introduce a little bit more about Brunswick's approach to this topic by saying, from our position, Brunswick believes it's our responsibility to serve as environmental steward, to protect the natural resources for the customers today and for generations to come. And so from our sustainability report, first published in 2020, Brunswick's ambition is to lead the industry in sustainable business practices, develop efficient, safe products, and reduce environmental impact. So we're very much interested in the concepts and the strategies that Dan mentioned at the beginning of the panel. And of course, we encourage our stakeholders to use the products in a manner that's safe, responsible as well. An example of our commitment is in the use of more sustainable materials. And one that I chose for today just to highlight is how Brunswick has transitioned from using balsa wood for structural cores into using a recycled PET material, which is to say recycled water bottles, essentially recycled soda bottles. You can, as noted here, some pictures. You can see the process and the application both, where Brunswick's absorbing almost 5 million recycled plastic bottles every year, which is saving 7,000 balsa trees, and reducing the manufacturing carbon footprint by 25%. And this is something that we're very proud of, and something that we're very much looking into as a company. What is our environmental impact from the sourcing decisions that we make, not just for fiberglass, but for all of our materials, in particular, like aluminum. As you know, Brunswick owns Mercury Marine, it's a division of Brunswick, and we're purchasing a lot of materials to supply engines for the industry. So whether it's fiberglass, aluminum, or any other, we're looking for opportunities to reduce the carbon footprint upstream and also downstream. And in downstream, it might involve creating more sustainable products. And here's an example of a product launch very recently, which is leveraging electrification technology to replace internal combustion generators on some larger boats. There you can see a bank of our Mastervolt lithium batteries carrying the energy for a day boat, which would otherwise have been supplied by an internal combustion engine. And here we're getting the electricity, hopefully off renewable sources from the grid at the marina, and then taking it with us as opposed to burning gasoline while you're underway. So there's this, and then a lot more, 300 patents, and the scope and the scale of our operation. We're definitely looking into the next generation of products to be more sustainable than the previous. And then also thinking about how we can update the business model to reduce our downstream emissions and reduce the carbon footprint of Brunswick overall. So that's hopefully a little bit of an introduction about from a Brunswick perspective. When we get to the panel piece, I've been with the company for about 17 years, working in product management and engineering roles. I can answer with some questions with a little bit from both perspectives. So thanks very much for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, John, for that quick but comprehensive overview with important marine industry angle there to keep in mind. What's also exciting about our time today, however, is that that's not the only angle that we're looking at this topic from. And we're very fortunate to have Chris Howell, Senior Director of Operations for Veolia North America, whose team really, I think, represents one of the most prominent components of the composite recycling landscape in North America. And they've been doing some exciting work with the wind energy industry. Chris, welcome. Appreciate your time. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what your team has been up to and how some of those lessons might be able to resonate with the audience today.
Sure. Excuse me. Well, thanks for having me, and really appreciate being here. It might be a little unique. I'm not the boat guy per se, although I own a boat. So the as was mentioned, I'm Senior Director of Operations of Recycling. It sounds like a big thing. It's specifically focused on what Veolia is doing with end-of-life wind turbine blades. It's visually a significant impact. You know, from an overall composite standpoint, the wind turbine industry actually represents a rather small piece of the overall pie. But given where we are now with renewable energy and finding more sustainable energy forms, coming up with new solutions for end of life is certainly what our focus is. Yeah, a little bit about Veolia, and I'll talk about a little bit about what we're doing, and then answer some questions. Obviously, you know, safety is core to everything that we do. We were talking this morning in a meeting that we've had about how unique it is to safely handle something as large as a wind turbine blade. It's actually not as easy as it might seem. It's certainly large. We're handling it with equipment that wasn't built for purpose, and a lot of what we're doing is brand new to the industry and brand new to the recycling industry specifically. So we're proud of our safety record. Safety is core to our culture. We've worked tens of thousands of hours so far, just having started this this offer last September. And we need to continue to be safe as we continue through our offering. Veolia has a global presence. Our composite visibility actually started in Europe as it related to the wind turbine blade industry. Europe being quite a bit more mature in renewable energy than the rest of the world, but the rest of the world is quickly catching up, with the United States and China being the largest wind producing countries in the world and growing significantly. So having a global presence allows us to have a knowledge transfer of the things that we learn from one geography to another, and one return on experience to another. So we hope that what we've pioneered here in North America is something that we can leverage in other countries. If you don't know Veolia, it's probably the, excuse me, the biggest country, or the biggest country, the biggest company you've never heard of. It's over 160 years old. It's headquartered in Paris, France. It's currently about 168,000 employees with a little over 30 billion euros in annual revenue. We're acquiring Suez at the moment, which is going to grow our company considerably, be a little over 40 billion euros in annual revenue and nearly 300,000 people. What we are very focused on is what we're calling the ecological transformation. We live on a big spaceship, and there's nowhere else to go that we know of right now, although we've got some billionaires that are racing into space to try and find some other locations. But we've got this beautiful orb that we live on, and we've got to take care of it. So that's a big part of what Veolia does. It's the largest water treatment company in the world. We manage a great deal of wastes, both hazardous and non-hazardous. A lot of it's very unique. And energy is also part of the revenue that we derive by running different energy platforms throughout the world. So we've been partnering with the renewable energy industry to try to come up with a way for end-of-life solutions. Wind is certainly very visible to us, but PV solar is becoming more and more visible as well. And you're seeing some of these technologies in much smaller forms even deployed in the marine industry. And we'll certainly see offshore wind being applied, and we're getting into the first development of the first projects for offshore wind, which are much, much larger than what we have on onshore. And then renewable energy is also waste to energy and biomass are some of the things that occur there. What Veolia has done is work at partnerships. There's only so much you can do as a vendor or a supplier. You really get a whole lot more when there's a collaborative partnership that's developed. And so we're looking at a number of these different things, especially how they impact oceans. Certainly the plastics that we've seen in the ocean are something of great concern to everyone, I hope, and certainly to us. So we're looking at partnering with different organizations. And how do you take, for instance, a plastic bottle or a spent empty yogurt container and make it into something different? And that's part of what we're doing. We're doing that with Danone with a partnership, and Unilever and Tetra Pak. So a lot of these companies are business to consumer. And how do we get that business to consumer back to business type of circularity associated with reclaiming and repurposing some of these materials? So those are some of the innovative partnerships that we're developing, and we continue to develop more of those. Our specific relationship with GE Renewables on the wind turbine side has been key to the development of the offering that we currently have. This is just a different way to show the upside down pyramid, but we certainly want to reduce, reuse, recycle, recover as much as we can. We certainly don't want to see things in landfill, and the more uses that we can get out of the material, like the other speakers have mentioned, is certainly key to developing circularity and a circular economy, and reusing more and more and reusing things more often through their life cycle. If you haven't noticed, the wind industry is growing exponentially. It used to be perhaps a decade ago that the only way to really get wind power in the US was through subsidies. Same with PV solar. I don't think anyone ever thought that you'd see the kind of growth that we have. The cost of the technology has come down significantly. The cost of electricity compared to 10 years ago for solar, for instance, has decreased 87%, and I think it's 65% reduction in the wind industry. So an industry that needed subsidies to exist no longer needs those subsidies to exist. You need a balanced portfolio. The wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. That being said, there's a huge push to look at more renewable energy development of electricity. And with that, then we've got to come up with solutions when these finite technologies need to be repurposed or recycled at end of life. And that's what we've been focused on. Unfortunately, this photo went viral, and it shows a number of wind blades that are being buried in a landfill. And that's what we want to prevent, especially when we think about renewable energy. It's certainly a very green energy source through its operation, and we need to make sure it's as green at end of life as well. So GE Renewables and Veolia got together, developed this partnership. It took a couple years in order to get it to where it is right now, but we have a long-term contract with GE Renewables, which has developed the foundation for an offering that we can now present to the rest of the composites industry and look at on a case-by-case basis other composites for recycling and recovering, using our wind turbine blade foundation as the base to look at some of these other composite recycling opportunities. And the marine industry in particular is very attractive. We're talking with a few folks, and the initial discussions appear to be very good. So I've mentioned why the wind turbine blades are obviously very visual, but what we have learned is that repurposing this engineered material as an alternative fuel in a cement kiln has some significant advantages. Not only is heat energy derived, it's displacing the use of coal, which then has a significant positive impact on CO2 emissions. And the material, the residual from the combustion process, those residuals then become actually part of the finished cement itself. So in the form of calcium oxides, silica, aluminum, iron, those are all ingredients necessary to make cement. So currently there's a significant opportunity to improve what is otherwise a rather CO2 intensive industry with the cement industry, and then finding a way to better utilize the material at its end of life. As I mentioned, the CO2 component, there is approximately 28% of the material is considered biogenic. So that means non-greenhouse gas forming. And from that aspect, it's a significant boost to decarbonizing this part of industry. Will we be doing this 5 years from now? I'm not sure. But right now, it provides the scale necessary, both with the wind energy, the composites industry, and then the cement industry. Leveraging all three of those together provides the scale that we need in order to address the material in question. So in summary, there's a CO2 benefit with the repurposed engineered materials. Nearly 50% of the wind blade is a valuable raw material. And ultimately, we're keeping the material that we're able to process out of landfills. And with that, hope to look forward to answer some questions. Hopefully we'll come up with a new industry. I'm calling it renewable energy circular economy solutions. We've got to address PV panels and new generation batteries as well. Veolia is looking at that right now. Our focus, and my focus in particular, has been on the wind turbine blade material. So Evan, I'll...
Thanks, Chris. That's really helpful and really encouraging to see how you guys are tackling that larger spectrum of difficult materials with some of those really significant partnerships. I know in our experiences here in Rhode Island, we've learned just how important it is to have capable and willing partners when it comes to collection and processing, which are critical stages for any beneficial reuse or recycling process. And in looking ahead in the United States at this growing glut of material, whether it's coming from turbines, boats, you name it, within this spectrum, obviously there's going to be more need for access to partners like Veolia to accomplish these critical steps. In creating that access in the future, do you think it's more of a challenge of physical infrastructure and having places and equipment to do specific jobs? Or as you kind of alluded to, is there another element that takes existing experience and expertise and kind of creates new practices or protocols around handling these hard to manage products?
Sure, great question, Evan. This is an 001 activity. We're a startup within a very large company, but we're a startup nonetheless. One of the biggest challenges, and the same with the marine industry, I'm sure, is just transportation of the material. With an 001 facility, we have one facility located in Missouri, so it's rather centrally located within the country, but getting material from a wind farm in Oregon or Washington State, or from somewhere in Maine to our location, the shipping logistics always becomes a real challenge. We've come up with some solutions to that in the near term. The long-term solution is to have more facilities like we have in Missouri throughout the country. And then we can be more geographically focused. We can minimize the transportation hurdles. We can minimize the costs associated with us being able to process that material and ultimately get it, again, shipping logistics on the offtake material. That also needs to be taken into consideration. So to answer your question, sure, the size is an issue, as it would be for a large marine craft as well. It is for the wind turbine blades themselves, but currently the shipping logistics is one of the hardest things to manage, both from a cost impact, and then we also have to be cognizant of the carbon impact associated with the transportation.
Certainly transportation was a big challenge for us, both in managing the candidates for recycling, as well as that raw recyclate material, that shredded material, trying to optimize spacing and making the most of tonnage and time on the road is something that fits into a number of different aspects of this process, and fits into working with end users and developing good relationships with end users that have an eye for this stuff. And Dan, you mentioned the importance of market demand in this challenge. As we are building the plane as it takes off, are there things that ACMA is considering as considerable factors around building that interest in that market demand? We know that the cement industry has this appetite today, but how does that evolve, with market demand in the future, you think?
Yeah, a great question. The nice thing about the cement industry is that there's a very large demand for the materials and the energy input from composites. So there is a ready source of market pull in that case. For the remanufactured composites, for the recycled materials, for instance, recovering fibers, glass and carbon fibers from boats and wind blades, and then making them into new products. That is not yet an established market for either one of those. So there would need to be products developed that were both beneficial and economical to reuse those materials. So that's sort of at the nascent stage. It wasn't that long ago that the cement kiln recycling wasn't really an option here in North America. So thanks to Veolia and others, that's now a possibility. There is grinding of composites has been available, off and on. There's also the question around, okay, if you grind them, what do you use the ground material for? So there are companies working on that. But I would say those are still nascent markets. So where you have a built-in market like a cement kiln, that has an advantage. But for these other markets, you need to first figure out, hey, what is the technology you're going to use? What kind of properties will that raw material have? And then you need to attract companies to utilize those raw materials to create new products. And that takes time. And that's why we as a trade association devote our time on behalf of our members, together with our members, to that kind of long-term thinking.
And I imagine that you would agree that within that process of identifying the values and the characteristics that are most beneficial within these resources, that a lot of times you're going back to rely on the expertise and the experience of the folks that are familiar with those products and materials, the people that are building them and servicing them, over the period of a product's life cycle. And I think that we've learned that there's a lot of existing expertise, whether it's in the composites field or within the marine industry field, that can apply to logistics that will benefit and serve a supply chain. This goes for end of life, but I also think it goes for manufacturing. And I want to turn to you, John, because I know that zero waste efforts are a big part of the sustainability mission at Brunswick. And I know that with other materials in certain facilities, there have been successful zero waste campaigns. That in-house expertise and knowledge, how do you feel like that might apply to managing composites moving forward?
Okay, that's a great question and a really big topic, Evan. I think that I would start by saying that Brunswick's been pursuing, as I mentioned in my introduction, a process of improving its sustainability of its operations, let's say to start with. More sustainable operations in particular, we have a parts and accessories plant was the first zero waste to landfill certified facility, and then one of our boat plants, that happens to be an aluminum boat plant, was the second one. And so while we continue to have goals, we set goals and work towards improving the sustainability of our internal operations, we're also looking upstream and downstream. And this is really where I think the composites comes into play, to say, how can we improve the sustainability of the products themselves? Towards that end, we have a community of practice focused around materials engineering that would work very closely in composites. And we're always studying in an advanced engineering phase, substitute materials for the ones that we know today. I used an example during the introduction of replacing balsa wood with a PET, recycled material. But when we get into some of the fiberglass composites, so you think about it, components around the hull or the internal pieces of the boat, that is really a focus for our material selection and material design today. And then we can also imagine how the way that the design of the boat, plays into the downstream processes also. There's a question in the chat about how do we break the boat apart into 3 or more waste streams. And I think that's a really important thing for us to think about, is as an industry, how do we collaborate from the design phase, all the way through, maybe recycled product, reused product, all the way to when it does eventually make it to its end of life. How do we make it easy for the whole industry to collaborate all the way across? Something that we're thinking about. So I think, short, to answer your question, starting with zero waste landfill and some of these more internal operations is something where we started to really dig in and start to build capabilities. And then we're starting to take that as a focus and grow upstream and downstream to try to collaborate with our partners outside of the Brunswick walls.
Well, thanks to everyone who's been putting questions in the Q&A function and in the chat. I'm going to stick with you, John, and draw from one of our audience Q&As, just touching on the impact of consumers. Obviously, you guys are very well attuned to the changing characteristics of boat owners. You guys are getting involved in the sharing economy with Freedom Boat Club. Through the various brands under your umbrella, you have a pretty good eye on different boating subgroups and what they're looking for in their products over their life cycles. How has consumer interest factored into these life cycle plans?
I think Brunswick endeavors to be very responsive to consumer interest. As sustainability is something that's not only important to Brunswick shareholders, Brunswick employees, but it's also something that's very important to the boaters, of course. I think one thing that we could say is that we're starting to track the consumer sentiment as it relates to sustainability and things whenever we're doing market research into the next generation of product. And we're definitely seeing an increase in sensitivity to sustainability and an interest in that from the consumer side.
I want to pull another question from the audience here and kind of toss it up to all of you collectively. Katie adds, it seems that partnership is important to end-of-life management projects. What do you see as the biggest threat to the development of those kinds of partnerships that might bridge sectors or fields that aren't used to working with one another in a setting like this?
I can try to take that, Evan. I think in some cases we're just getting organized. I really appreciated Dan and Chris's presentation and thinking about some of these things, and we're going to have to work out, as it's going to take decision making, from the beginning of the supply chain all the way to the end, in order to make all the adjustments that we need to really modernize our approach to the industry.
And Evan, I can add. We've been seeing it with some of the other partnerships, and that is at end of life, you've actually got to be thinking of beginning of life. And I think this goes to John's point, is at least what we're seeing in the wind industry right now. We're at end of life with the previous generation of product. Where they're going to be with the next generation of product is going to have a much greater focus on recyclability and reuse capabilities. I think John had mentioned that as well. So it's very important to develop that partnership such that you can be part of the development phase of the next generation of whatever that material might be, so that you can design in circular economy into the product from the very beginning. And so that's where I think the partnership really has to go. And groups like Dan's and ACMA, I know, have been pushing very hard in order to be able to think about the end when you're in the beginning. It kind of sounds counterintuitive, but that's what you've got to do.
In your experience, Chris, with some of those partnerships, is there a translation period that needs to occur? Obviously, with Veolia, you're moving to different sectors, different products, different materials. So obviously, maybe some of the protocol or approaches stay the same from your end, but are you finding that there's ways that are successful or not successful in translating that critical information to get folks to understand what you would need from them to plug those pieces in the supply chain together?
Sure. Well, you have to have a champion. You have to have champions in all of the organizations involved. And you have to be willing and able to make the commitment in resources, whether they're monetary resources, human resources, intellectual resources. All of those things have to be able to be committed to. It takes two to tango, and it takes three to party. So you have to have that dedication, that development to the partnership, and be able to be very transparent in that. And at the end of the day, all of the groups, more or less, it needs to be a business case that makes sense as well. And so you have to be cognizant of what each is trying to achieve, what is realistic and what isn't, and be very pragmatic with the approach, but also be aware of each other's goals ultimately in the project.
Looking through the rest of our questions, there was another comment that touched on the financial feasibility of the recycling process, in particular, the cumbersome efforts around the separation of these materials. It brings to mind, I think, some of the impacts around cost and financial feasibility. I want to turn to Dan on this. From a regulatory or legislative standpoint, what is ACMA seeing around composites recycling, and does it have anything to do with sort of managing the cost that we're looking at right now for some of these activities and potentially subsidizing some of these activities for a period of time?
Yeah, of course. There's a lot of activity right now. The current administration, a lot of focus on circularity, reducing the impacts of climate change and so forth. So it's very much top of mind right now. There are several items working their way through Congress right now related to recycling, and also looking at carbon taxes for imports of certain materials like steel and other materials, aluminum. So if you look at composites through the lens of the regulatory function, obviously Europe, as was mentioned earlier, Europe has kind of led the way from a regulatory standpoint. So policy really has set the stage for the recycling systems that have been developed in Europe. Largely in Germany has pioneered some of these systems because it has been more costly initially to stand up these recycling systems, and there have been some that have succeeded and some that haven't done as well over in Europe. So they've kind of been an incubator. On the other hand, our strategy here in North America for composites has been, let's as an industry get out in front of this rather than be regulated into an environment that doesn't make sense economically. How can we do this economically? And so we've been working, trying to support businesses like Chris's, trying to support companies like Brunswick to find solutions that are economical and make sense. And I think we were on a webinar about a year ago, and GE was part of that. And I think one of the quotes is, if it's not economical, it probably isn't sustainable in the long term. So these concepts are highly intertwined. So what we've been promoting and what we've been working with our research institutions, federal labs, various companies, startup companies, is, hey, how can we turn this into a business? How can we turn the business of recovering these materials into a viable business? And then you also mentioned, Evan, what is the role of government in standing up maybe supply chain and maybe helping to promote and support these nascent industries for recycling and reuse of composites? And we definitely think there's a role. ACMA thinks there's a role that government can play. And so we have been talking about that with various agencies. And I think in this current administration, you're going to see some things move forward related to development of recycling systems, possibly as part of the infrastructure programs they're putting through. So I'm not sure there will be money necessarily dedicated to composites, but I expect to see at least something come through in the next, the next, if not weeks, the next months, related to encouraging more recycling and reuse.
I appreciate that perspective of let's, as an industry, get out in front of the challenge. Let's not wait for the hands of regulation or oversight. And I think that one of the things that IBEX is really good at doing as a part of the marine patchwork is demonstrate that the makeup of marine manufacturers and marine industry members, it's not identical. There are large, small, vertically integrated, very specified. It's important to ensure that as these solutions develop, I think that there are ways to lift, folks who might not have the ability to look as far over the horizon as Brunswick does. John, do you feel like, as a marine industry, there are, steps or standards from a manufacturing standpoint that could, provide some sort of universal guidance in the future? Do you see the likelihood of that, expanding as the conversation grows around this topic?
I think that's entirely possible. I'll say, from a boat builder's perspective, engine maker's perspective, if you look downstream and understand what the requirements are for the downstream businesses, the reverse supply chain, the recycling operations, if you understand what their requirements are in order for them to be a viable business, the better that those are articulated, the more we can understand those, the more we can kind of develop product design requirements that will be that, this is like what Chris said, if we understand the end of life at the beginning as product design requirements, we can design products that, say, for example, to make it easier to disassemble, to separate the material into 3 or more waste streams, and then be sensitive to the downstream processes, like how do we separate those materials so that those processes can be more efficient. I think that's one way. Another way might be towards collaboration to try in order to really achieve scale at an industry. Because let's say if we brought up the reverse supply chain of rounding up end of life materials and bringing them to a regional recycling center, how do we make the most of every truckload? How do we keep that recycling facility with a nice steady input of material for them to work with, so that facility can be operated efficiently rather than start stop? That's something we can all work on together, and I think that would be an interesting pathway and something interesting to discuss, so that we can kind of all evolve towards a more recyclable or more sustainable future.
Certainly, and what better place to continue to grow this conversation than a platform such as IBEX? I just want to recognize that we're coming up to the end of our time together here at the top of the hour, and I want to just take a moment to thank all of you guys for spending this hour with us to discuss this very complex topic. We spent an hour. We probably could spend a day or two working through some of the things that we've highlighted. In I think the interest of the bigger theme here at IBEX, and embracing that idea of leaving this conversation with a better understanding, seeds planted for the future. I want to just make sure that everyone has an understanding of how they can get in touch with you guys. Dan, we've seen some information in the chat, folks wanting to learn more about Remade. Are you the best point of contact for folks that want to follow up and learn more about ACMA efforts?
Absolutely. Please reach out to me directly, and I'll put my email address in the chat box here for people to reach out to.
And as far as material goes and evaluating the future of end-of-life composite reuse, Chris, is Veolia at a point today where you are accepting inquiries from marine industry partners to evaluate potential material sources?
Absolutely, and we've have some dialogue with a couple different companies that are interested in what we can do, not only at end of life, but also with waste associated with manufacturing. So that's something that's we're quite interested in. Not all materials can go through our process, but I think if we can do a wind turbine blade, for the most part, there isn't a whole lot that we can't do. So yes, we're very interested in diversification away from just a wind turbine blade material for other materials that would be suitable for our process.
And John, we know that Brunswick is busy, continuing to pioneer the future of boat building, especially on the sustainability front. As far as your sustainability actions go, the last couple of years, you guys have reported out with significant documentation. Can folks expect to see a similar report later this year?
Yes, absolutely. We'll be updating our sustainability report every year.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, John, Dan, and Christopher again, and thank you to the entire IBEX education team for helping us put this topic on today. On behalf of the Rhode Island Marine Trades Association, I'm Evan Ridley, and we look forward to joining you next time for more discussion. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Right.